And then we discuss the fruits, which is our future generations, our children, our grandchildren, our students, the people we teach and inspire. Those are all part of the comparison to the tree. And then we took it a step further, and we discussed yesterday how the roots are our subconscious being, and we discussed that you need strong faith, emunah, betachan, faith in God, and in order for our Judaism to prosper, to be strong, to have the wherewithal to overcome the challenges and difficulties of life, because life can be capricious with all kinds of challenges that come our way. But now we're going to take it a step further. I'm going to look at another angle of the Tu B'Shvat comparison. Besides for the explanations that we discussed, but there's another way that we are compared with a tree. There's a very intriguing medrash that I want to share with you, based on a verse in Tehillim, where King David states, he says, Adam lahevel dama, which means man is like a breath. And he says, Yamav kitzel over, his days are as a fleeting shadow. Okay, those are the words of King David, that our days are like a passing, fleeting shadow. So my question to you, my friends, is, what does that mean? How do you understand this? How do you understand that our days are like, the man is like a breath, and our days are like a fleeting shadow? Yes, carpe diem, definitely. Now here's the thing. One of the great Talmudic sages, his name was Rabbi Huna, he's known in the Talmud, and he explains this verse in the Medrash to mean that there are three types of shadows in actual fact. Three types of shadows. What are the three types of shadows that he refers to? One is the shadow of a bird, which flies by very quickly, like the airplane, the helicopter that flies by, maybe the drone, right? And it casts a shadow, but it's very fleeting. It's temporary. It's there for a split moment, and it continues by. Then he says there's the shadow of a wall. What's the wall shadow like? How would you describe a wall? I wish you could all see this, our online participants can. But the shadow of a wall it has some permanence, right? You could see it, during the early hours in the morning, the late afternoon, you see the shadow, right? What happens in the middle of the day when the sun is right above it? And you don't have the wall shadow because the sun is shining right down, right below. But then he says there's another kind of a shadow, and that's the shadow that's generated by a tree. What's the significance about the shadow from a tree, my friends? Does the sunshine right above it at midday have any effect? Does it in any way diminish that shade? Why not? Because it's constant, it's always present. What's the idea? Rav Huna continues and he tells us, if only life would be like the shadow that's cast by a wall or a tree. But he says, in actual fact, for most of us, and I'm a little bit younger than you, but still, I think I'm talking to myself, that life flies by so quickly like the shadow of a bird. Yamav ketzel over. A person's years are like a passing shadow. We say these words, it's the words of King David in Tehillim, and I think it's important for us to reflect on and to understand what this means, Yamav ketzel over, that a person's years are like a passing shadow, how it flies by, that time just flies so quickly. How do they say? I'm trying to recall the nice Yiddish language. Vu geht die Jahren? Yeah, vu geht die Jahren? In fact, the Talmud says, "V'halavai ketziloi shel koisel." If only life would be like the shadow cast by a wall or the shadow of a tree. But in actual fact, Rav Huna says, no, it's like the shadow of a bird. So what does this mean? How is it that our days are like the fleeting shadow of a bird, which obviously doesn't remain stationary, but it's fleeting, right? It's so quick. And if you think about it, our days are relatively few. How much time do we have in this world? Now, I'm not trying to create panic. There's a terminology called thanatophobia, the fear of death. We're worried about what's going to happen. I don't want to talk about that. I was at a Yahrzeit event last night where, again, it was a similar idea being discussed. A young lady in the community who passed away a few years ago. In fact, we wrote a Torah in her memory at our shul, Ilit Hodaya Shani. And it was a very special event to be at. I think it's now more than 10 years since she passed away, 12 years. It was just after her bat mitzvah, to just think where she would be today. And her brother was saying she was at ease, she was at peace with the idea. She said to her siblings, she knows she's going. We're all going eventually, right? Two inevitables, death and taxes. In Judaism, we shouldn't be afraid of this topic. I know it's not a comfortable topic, and it's not something we want to talk about, death. And that's not really the point of my discussion with you here today either. Firstly, we all know that it doesn't matter a person's age or stage of life, because people can go at any age or stage. And that's why we constantly remind ourselves that yesterday's history and tomorrow's a mystery. Today's a gift of God. And that's why it's called the present. And that is what today's shiur is all about. A lesson that we can learn from the tree. The tree's shadow is consistent. It's always present. It's always there. And because the tree's giving its shadow all the time, we could learn from that. And that is what Rav Huna in the Gemara is lamenting. He says, halavai, if it were like the wall, that means we're mostly present. If only the tree to always be present. Right? The best present we could give our loved ones is our presence, to be present with them. Now look at most people. There was a discussion on the radio this morning. If any of you were driving in your car, just after 7 o'clock news on Chai FM, Howard Feldman was interviewing, I don't know who, but I was listening to it in the car when I was doing the second school drop of the morning. And I heard him interviewing somebody talking about you go to restaurants today and you're supposed to be connecting, but everybody's on their phone. And, that's the family meeting. Everybody's on. And the truth is, I'm probably guilty of it as well. I remember when my kid was little, now he's glued to his phone, he's a teenager. But when he was little, I guess I was his role model. I remember once talking to me and he says, Daddy, you're not listening. I said, of course I'm listening. He says, no, not only with your ears, you're not listening with your eyes. So that's my point, is the Talmud is telling us that when we look at the shadows, and obviously we have these different shadows of life, and we could talk about it, but let's understand how and where the importance that we don't let time just fly us by. It is going to fly by. It's my pet peeve, that big sign outside my shul. The shul is right across the Chau train. You've probably heard me say this a dozen times already. Big sign on the Chau train advertising, want to kill time? It was advertising Showmax. For those watching internationally, that's our local version of a Netflix. I heard they're not doing very well. I heard they were a dismal failure. That's what I saw in the news the other day. I guess, these types of businesses need serious subscriptions in order for them to work. But anyways, that's not the point. The point is that if time flies by, how are we making the most of it? That's the point here. And that's really the idea that I wanted to discuss with you, that how do we make the most of every moment that we have, right? There's another interesting Talmudic statement based on a verse in Kohelet, in Ecclesiastes, where Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, says, who knows what is good in life? He says, making life like a shade. Those are the words of King Solomon in Kohelet. And again, you could ask this question or discuss this. What does it mean? What kind of shade is King Solomon referring to long before Rav Huna in the Talmud? And he says, a shade of a wall that has the substance, it stands still, or like the shade of a palm tree that also has substance, that it's always present. Says the Gemara, came along David HaMelech, King David, in Tehillim, the father of King Solomon, and he explained, he said, a person's years, kitzel over, are like a passing shadow. And the Talmud tells us, Rav Huna said in the name of Rav Acha, like a bird that flies over and passes, and his shade passes with him. Said Shmuel, like the shade of bees that has no substance at all. So I'm not so sure why the Talmud goes into all this detail of what kind of shade and all that. We already have the wall, the tree, and the bird. So let's focus on that. But I do see other perspectives here in the Talmud. And I want to discuss this with you. How do you understand this? Why are our days like the fleeting shadow of a bird, right? And I guess you could ask, is our impact fleeting? Is it too quick? Does it fly by too fast? How do you understand these shadows? Any thoughts, comments, suggestions before I take you further into the Talmud? To me, the message that the Talmud is telling us, I think is, while it's simple, it's also profound. And it's telling us the three types of shadows, these different shadows of life, they represent different lifestyles, okay? There are people who generate the shadow of a bird. There are others who create the shadow of a wall. And then there are those who are compared to the tree and its shadow. And what's important for us, it's never too late. So if you think back, which shadow am I portraying? You could change it. You could always aspire to inspire so you won't expire. Right? Every human being, we all leave an impact. We all have an impact that we make in this world, right? That is the fruit of the tree that we discuss, that the Torah says, Ki ha'adam eitz hasada, man is like a tree in the field. Every one of us is like a tree. We bear fruit, whether it's our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, or your students, or the people you have an impact and influence on. Each of us casts our own inimitable shadow on our world. And why do I say inimitable? Because every one of us is born as an original. And there's no reason for any of us to die as a copy of anyone else. Everyone else is taken. Let's just be true to ourselves, right? And therefore, our sages tell us, life, Clive, can I give you a job to tell these guys to schweig? Thank you. Thank you, Clive. Our sages tell us life is a powerful play, and every one of us contributes our verse. I don't know whoever said that, and life is a ballad. We all have our note, our key, our musical contribution. I once heard a story about a very famous, I don't know if he was a composer or a conductor. I think it was a conductor, an Italian conductor. Anyone remember his name? He came to Israel in the 1930s when the Nazis forbade Jews from participating in the European opera houses or musical concerts and all. So this conductor, who remembers his name? You'll do a quick Google search for me. This conductor came to Israel, predate Israel, British Mandate Palestine, and he helped put together what they called then the Palestine Philharmonic Orchestra. I think it was later called the Jerusalem Philharmonic. Anyways, the story goes that one day he was unwell, he was older, and he couldn't make it to the concert. So he was at home listening on the radio. This wasn't ordinary radio. What did they call it? Earwave? Shortwave radio. Shortwave radio. And with him was his biographer, who was writing the story of his life. And there was 100 instruments meant to be played that day in the orchestra, different musicians. And in the middle of the concert, this conductor, who we're going to get her name, Raz is finding his name in a second. No, it was a man. It was a man. And he says, I could tell there's one violin missing. What do you mean there's one violin missing? There were like 14 violins in the concert that day. How do you know one is missing? Anyways, he says, sure, I'm paying attention. And he listens to the concert. Afterwards, the biographer was so amazed and intrigued. So he made a phone call to find out what happened. Was there indeed a missing violin? And there was. It wasn't Leonard Bernstein. I don't think he was Jewish. No? An Italian. Yes. How do you say his first name? Arturo Toscanini. He said, Mr. Toscanini, how did you know it was missing? He says, I'm the composer of the music, or I'm the conductor of the music. And I could tell no violin. We're not just throwing in 14 violins for the fun of it. All right, let's add another one. Each one had the particular music and contribution that it made. And in the same way, I want to say, each of us makes our difference in this world. Another story I once heard, one of the famous musicians, I don't remember if it was Beethoven or Wagner or you name them, who was having a meeting with the Austrian emperor. You could look who that was too. Why not? Which musician, which famous musician was playing for the Austrian composer Ludwig, what was his name? Was it Beethoven? Anyways, the conductor was, the musician was playing the music, and afterwards the emperor says, you know, it was wonderful, great entertainment, but a little bit too long. So the musician asks, or the composer, he says to the emperor, he says, Your Royal Highness, please tell me which notes you would like me to remove. I say every one of us has our role, has our mission, has our purpose. We're all indispensable to God's plan here for this world. And we have to realize that we have our own unique role to play. Nobody else could play it for us. Each of us has our contribution, our notes to the ballad that we call life. And the question is, how profound and how real is our impact? And we shouldn't let our days fly by. And we could ask ourselves, will my shadow be like a bird, like a wall, like a tree? Which one will it be? It's a real question, and it's never too late, okay? It's never too late, but it's a real question that we must ask ourselves. And so Rav Huna in the Gemara, he's telling us that there are those individuals whose lives, you could say, can be compared to the passing shadow of the flying bird. Here today, gone tomorrow, garnished. Okay, the bird flies and the shadow flies with it. And this represents an individual, you could say, whose impact is fleeting. And we all know they might live maybe many years even in this world. But the Rebbe would say, Jahren gehen nicht beim Passport. The years don't have to go by the passport. Okay, people could spend decades building up a business, a company, but what happens? It could go down in the tubes without even any enduring, lasting value. You could say, but that was an empire. That was what they call those businesses that's like Stutterfords. It was around forever. What happened to it? What happened? Shift happens. Yeah. Those people, they could have built their businesses. They may have been very, very, very busy. But essentially, they're like the flying bird. Here today, gone tomorrow, done and dusted. They weren't involved in anything that really left an impression or that made an eternal dent in life. They cast their shadow by virtue of being alive. They were here. They existed, right? They walked on the streets. They shopped in stores. They deposited money in their bank accounts. But what difference did they make? They bought a house, they sold a house, they tailored clothing, they purchased things, they drove a fancy car. Oh, whoa, wonderful deal. What difference did they make? What positive impact did they have on the world? Yeah, Ramesha.
It says a person lives 78 years just to do one good deed.
Oh, that's exactly. Is that a fleeting shadow or is that a lasting impact? That's true. That is true. Absolutely. And that one good deed will lead to more good deeds, to many more good deeds. So perhaps that's the point. But the idea, look, we could actually discuss that. I'm not being authoritarian in my hypothesis here today. I agree with you that these ideas can certainly be applied about life being that we make, but that's what I'm imploring everyone. You're right. Listen, Elisha ben Avuya was able to, we discussed him last week. He was able to do teshuvah in one instant, right? So it's true, we could make a difference. And people have made lasting impacts and changes. And you'll say that Elisha ben Avuya, to this very day, we recall that a baskal, a heavenly voice came out and said that his repentance was accepted on high and he was admitted into heaven, even though he was a terrible sinner and transgressed every offense in the Torah. The point, I guess, that each of us can ask ourselves that we all, every day, we can't go back in time, okay? What was. But we could go forward and we could say, how will I make today better? And I don't mean this in a depressing way that we have to, and it doesn't mean, you have to accept your age and stage of life, what you're capable of doing. But if this is a way to inspire yourself to get up and to do something more meaningful. I was listening to Rabbi Twersky, also on Chai FM, yesterday in the car. And he quoted the famous words, I'm sure you've heard it from many people, who say that line of, no dying person ever said, I wish I spent more time in the office, right? There were people like Sam Walton, famous founder, builder of one of the biggest businesses in the world, Walmart, which has opened shops here now in Johannesburg. And Sam Walton famously said, I blew it. He made a lot of money. Wow, he's the world's richest man for 5 minutes. But no time with the family, didn't contribute in a meaningful way to his community. So yeah, he worked long hours and many days, but he neglected the most important relationships. And for what? Right? Where did all this hard work go? What was it invested? He wasn't Jewish. But there's plenty of Jewish people guilty of this too, no doubt. Okay? And these are all important questions we could address and ask ourselves, because it's never too late. Nishtakim farfallen, Yiddishkeit says. You could always rectify. And if we messed up in the past, to recognize, to acknowledge, and to move forward and to try to improve our future. That's what it's about, right? One of my favorite stories I love collecting. So here's one of them. There was a professor who stood before his philosophy class, and he came in with a bunch of items in front of him. You know that, Maisa? So when the class began, wordlessly, he picked up a very large empty mayonnaise jar, okay? And he started filling it with golf balls. They all fit into the jar. He's putting one in after another, all these golf balls. And he asked the students, tell me, you see my jar here? Is the jar full? Look pretty full. Yeah, everybody says it's full. So now the professor then picked up a box of little pebbles, okay? And he pours all the pebbles into the jar, and he shook the jar very tightly, and the pebbles rolled into all the open areas between the golf balls. And he then asks his students, tell me, now is the jar full? What would you say? Everyone agreed it's full. Okay, so now he picked up a box of sand. And he starts pouring the sand into the jar, right? And we all know, of course, the sand filled up all the crevices, the holes, the spaces in between. And he asks the students again, tell me, is the jar full? And he gets this roaring, unanimous, yes, there's no way, it's filled to the top. There's no way you can fit anything else in. And now the professor pulled out 2 cans of beer that he had hidden under his table, and he pours the beer contents into the jar. And you know that the liquid obviously can fill the empty spaces because it can solidify in the sand. And once again, he asks the students, is it full? But now the students are intrigued and laughing. And now the professor says, look, I want you to recognize that this jar represents life, okay? The golf balls are all important things for us. The important stuff. Your family, your religion, God, right? Your soul, your children, your health, your friends, your passions, your conscience. All the important things, he says, are the golf balls. Things that if everything else was lost and only these remained, then we all know your life would still be full, right? So they fill up the jar. But there are other things. There's marbles and pebbles. So those pebbles, he says, are the things that matter to you. They're also important, but not as important. They're secondary. Your job, your house, your car, right? The sand, he says, is everything else, the small stuff. So if you put the sand first into the jar, will you have room for even your job or whatever other things that are in the second category and in between? Let alone your family, your children, your religion, all the other important stuff. There's no room left for the pebbles and the golf balls if you fill it first with the sand. So therefore the professor says the same thing, obviously. This is a a metaphor for life. If you spend all your time and energy on the small stuff, scrolling on social media, Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and TikTok and this, that, and that, and TV and games, what's going to be left? When are you going to have time for the important things, right? So pay attention to the things that are critical to your happiness. Look at those golf balls. In fact, I once heard somebody else did this experiment, not with golf balls, but with crystal balls and rubber little balls. So the bigger ones were crystal and the smaller ones were rubber. And what did he say? He said, if the rubber balls fall, they'll bounce. You'll make them up. If the crystal balls fall, they'll smash, they'll break. He says, remember what's the crystal balls in your life. Forget the golf balls. The crystal ones. You don't want those to shatter. Okay? And we all know that it's very hard to repair the damage when it's done. We should try, obviously we should definitely try to fix it. But that's the point. Pay attention to the things that are critical, that are essential to your life, your happiness, your children, the time to build relationship with your soul, with your spouse, right? There'll always be time to clean the house. You'll always find time to fix the things that are, the other things, the less important things. Right? But take care of those crystal balls first. The things that really matter. Set your priorities. The rest is just sand and pebbles. And it's an important point. Anyways, when he finished, there was a profound silence, and one of the students raised her hand. With a very puzzled expression on her face, the student turns to the professor and asks, but what did the beer represent? You told us about the different sized bowls and the golf balls and the pebbles and the marbles and the sand, but what was the beer? And the teacher says, the beer, I'm glad you asked that. It just goes to show that no matter how full your life may seem, there's always room for a couple of l'chaims. All right, so the point is that oftentimes we find ourselves busy, very, very busy, but we forget about what's important. That's the bird, okay? Again, we might be like the bird sometimes, but that's why we're having the discussion here, to remind ourselves what we have to do and how we could be sure that we're not going to be in that situation, that hopefully we could prioritize more. And that's why let's talk a little bit about the wall and then about the tree. Because ultimately the tree example that the sages of the Talmud tells us is the palm tree. What do we have a passage in the prayers? I shouldn't jump the gun. We'll talk about that more when we get to the palm tree. But what do our sages tell? Not our sages. King David tells us in Tehillim. We say it in our davening every Shabbos, both Friday night and Shabbos day. Tzadik katamar yifrach. The righteous will prosper, will blossom like the palm tree. So we'll get back to that. Let's first talk about the wall. Okay, I'm jumping the gun. We talked about the second category, excuse me, of our lives compared to the shadow of a wall. Now, a shadow of a wall has some permanence, unlike the tree that's consistently there, right? You could see the shadow of a wall during the earlier hours of the day, during the later hours of the day. But midday, when the sun is out, what's the impact of the shadow? It's not there, right? There's no wall shadow during the day, during the midday. Now, there are people who leave an impact when there's no major heat, when the heat's not on, when there's no warmth or passion in their lives, right? When the game is waning and there's not much action going on, then people become sensible. In the morning, in the evening hours, when they're very young, or all of a sudden, like the fellow who said yesterday, Rabbi, I come to your classes because I'm cramming for the finals. Right? Well, when things are quiet and calm, so they're ready to give themselves to others, to invest in eternity. But as long as the sun in their life is bursting hot, they're too caught up in themselves to reflect on how they are impacting others. And we know the kids ask us, that's me, when are you coming home, Dad? Right? Oh, when the sun begins to set, when I get older, when I can finally make it, I'll be there soon. I'm working late for your sake, right? But what happens? The time passes by, and we forget to spend the time with them, with the children, or not only the children. Let's talk about our own important things with our soul, with God, with our loved ones, with whoever. There are important areas of life that we neglect. And the problem is that those who needed us most, who needed our shade, our comfort during those important times, during the heat, what happens? We wait for the sun to set. We miss the opportunity. Opportunities disappear, they're gone. And what does Hillel famously say in Pirkei Avot? V'im lo achshav? Not now? Hey, matai, when? Says Rambam, meaning, today we start the Rambam session again, so it's a good time to jump on the bandwagon. Rambam says, if I don't acquire moral and idealistic traits in my youth, when will I acquire them? I will not acquire them once I grow old, since it will be difficult to change by then. Since my character traits, noble or base, will have become permanent and strong. As King Solomon says, Chanoch lenar al pi darko, teach a lad according to his way, gam ki yaskin, that even when they grow old, they will not depart from it. Now, of course, Maimonides is not saying it's ever too late. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but reminder, reality check, we're not dogs. But nevertheless, it's much harder when we're older. We're set in our routines, in our habits, in our ways. That's why the famous Mishnah says, in Pirkei Avos again, the Altoimar do not say, Lichshe'efna eshne, when I have time, eshna, that's when I'll study. Shema, perhaps, lotipane, will never have that free time. What do you say, Tzipora? Lo alecha, that's a very good point Tzipora is making. Lo alecha ha'avoda ligmar. It's not for you to finish the work, but it's also not for you to say, I have no time to do it. We have to do our part. You don't have to do it all yourself. Do it. I know for some of you right here in this room today, probably wasn't easy getting up. Not easy. It's not easy at whatever conditions in life, but you are here. You're an inspiration. I'm amazed. I'm inspired. And for those of us joining us on Zoom, I say the same to you, because some of our participants told me that they wake up so late in the day, they're night owls, they're nocturnal, they're this, they're that. Wonderful. Maybe they're doing other meaningful things. I don't know, for plenty of people, they can't get to it. My father used to share an expression he learned in Germany when he was there after the war. Margen, nar nicht tote, sagen alle falu lote. Can anybody translate that from German for me? To Margen, nar nicht tote, sagen alle falu lote. Tomorrow, not today. That is what foolish people say. So let's not be foolish, no matter our age and stage. Here's another teaching from Rabbi Yonah of Gerona, like his rhyming name. He said the reasoning, why should you not say, I'll put off for tomorrow what I could do today? He says, is because one doesn't know what the next day will bring, right? Tomorrow's a mystery. Tomorrow you'll be busy with something new, and you'll have to follow up with something else. We all know how it goes, right? Who here do I owe a phone call to, or WhatsApp, or whatever it was? I know I do. We sometimes get busy, we forget, we miss a message, we're planning. So often it happens. I chance upon a message, like, oh, shoots. I never got back to that person. And it wasn't malicious. I'm not that kind of guy. But I forgot. I got busy with other stuff. I'm just as guilty as everyone else. Says Rabbi Yonah of Gerona, there's no lack of things that fluctuate every moment of the day. We're going to end up leaving this world without what's important, without the Torah. And in fact, the Talmud says no person leaves this world with even half their goals accomplished. So therefore, let's do our best as we could, because that's what's most important, to seize the opportunity each and every single day. God gives us a chance. Let's chaparain, carpe diem. That's it. That's our message here, day in, day out. Carpe diem. But therefore, we have another example. Tzaddik, what does the righteous person do? Katamar, there is the life which could be linked and likened to the shadow of a tree. And what example do they give? Sorry, I didn't put in the picture a palm tree. My apologies. Gives the example specifically of a palm tree. Because under the branches of any tree, essentially, but King David uses the palm tree for the tzaddik. He says you could always find shade, you could always find comfort. Whether it's in the morning, at midday, evening, you'll always be comforted in the shadow of the tree. The tree always casts its healing and comforting shade, and anyone who comes under it will bask in that tranquility, will benefit from its reinvigorating, rejuvenating environment. Absolutely, yeah. What were you saying? Katamar, yeah, palm tree. But any tree essentially could offer us this. But King David uses the tamar, the palm tree, as an example. And this represents the type of person who obviously doesn't forget. They never cease to remember that we are, every single one of us are indispensable to God's plan. Every one of us is here on a divine mission. We are ambassadors of God. Every single moment we have to be bringing light to this world. And there are so many people who need our compassion and our clarity and our love. And we have to bring that to the people around us. And no matter where we stand in life, no matter what situation, if the sun is just rising, or it's in its full glow, or it's already on the way down, sunset, doesn't matter. This is something we have to remember. Every one of us is a leader. Even if we're not the Rabbi Rebbitzin or the CEO or the executive or the head professor or whatever, we have our sphere of influence, right? We each have to be the agents of love and hope and trust to the people around us. And every one of us is very capable of that. That's what we have to do. Why do we die? If I had the answer to these questions, I don't think I'd be in this position. God never made me privy to the answers of these difficult, complicated questions of why bad things happen to good people and why, unfortunately, some people die young. And the truth is, any age and stage, in my mind, is young. It's not easy to say goodbye. And therefore, let's not worry about, let's focus on the moment. Let's say, what am I doing to maximize every single day? And to love more fully, and to be more present and more full and more and there with our loved ones. Because I can't answer the question why people die young. Obviously, they finished their mission in this world, but sometimes it's too soon for us. Yeah.
You said a very interesting thing. You said a person doesn't live their life with fulfilling half their goals. If that's the case, choose your goals carefully.
Agreed. Now, if getting rich is a goal, wonderful. And what are you going to do with those riches? Right? You know the famous story about Reichman from, there's a Reichman family in Toronto. I believe they're a very Hasidic family. And when the grandpa, who was responsible for building Canary Wharf in London and many other big projects, he was a philanthropist, a big Baal Chesed, a kind person and a charitable person. When he died, he left an envelope for his family who were religious. And he wrote in it that he would like to be buried in his favorite socks. You know the story. I mean, listen, I think he was affiliated with the Satmar Hasidic movement. And you know, Satmar on Shabbos, they dress in a big furry hat called a shtreimel or a spudik. And they wear long white socks up to the knees and all. He had a pair specially bought that will match his tachrichim, his shrouds, very nicely. And you know, sometimes people go to shul for fashion shows, who's dressed with more or less or what, and you know. So maybe he thought he's going to go up to the heavenly realm and he's going to come in with the nicest weiße Socken. He's going to look the most fashionable. And he wants to be buried in the socks, so he wrote to his kids. And the kids thought it's a little strange, but anyways, if that's what their father wants, they have to fulfill their father's wish. They tell the Chaver Kadisha that they have to get this done. Chaver Kadisha says, sorry, no can do. How dare you? I don't know if his children were like that, but so the fable goes. I'm sure the story grows legs and is embellished with other details. But to keep it simple for today, the kid said, our father took good care of the Chaver Kadisha. And if you want any continuity to that, you better fulfill his will. I said, we would love to, but Jewish law is Jewish law. We can't compromise. They went to a din Torah. They had a tribunal, a judiciary of the most esteemed, illustrious rabbinic figures. 3 rabbis that all you saw were beards. And the rabbi said, sorry, it says in the holy books that people are buried in tachrichim and shrouds. By the way, there was a time in Jewish history where the Talmud discusses that people did compete on who could be fancier dressed and what kind of coffin. Until one of the great sages, I don't remember which one it was, he made a decree, a takana. He said, everyone's getting buried in the same shrouds, simple pine coffin. And why? Because he didn't like this competition. And who's going to have? You're going to have a fancier, you're going to have mahogany wood and gold and silver and this and that, and you're going to dress in velvet or this. He says, garnished. Everybody's going to go in the same. So today, they're expensive, these shrouds. They're supposed to be the poor man's clothing. You cannot believe the price they charge for it. Either way, I do believe they're hand sewn, etc. There are laws and customs and traditions and all that that's related to it. But the point, my friends, is that we should prioritize what's most important to us, okay? And therefore, let's remember what is most important. What are those crystal balls that we don't want to drop that could smash? And therefore, what am I going to be, or how am I going to be there for those around me, to my loved ones, to my community, to my nation, to our world? Unfortunately, we see an era today where Jews are betraying their Judaism. We see it too common. Jews taking the wrong side and dirty, besmirching Israel. It's really tragic to see that. The story of Chani Amagal, I wanted to read it to you today from the Talmud. It says the Gemara, Yom Echad haba azal ba'urcha. One day, Chani Amagal was traveling on the road, Chazyalahu gavro da havanata charuva, and he saw a man planting. What's a charuva? Carob tree. Amar Lei said to this man, At kama shnin toim, for how many years does it take for the carob tree to grow, to bear fruit? Amar Lei ad shivin shmin. The man says to Chani, 70 years. Amar Lei pshitalach the chayis shivin shnin. So Chani asks the man, like, perplexed, do you think you'll be alive another 70 years? You're already an elderly gentleman. Amar Lei hai gavra, the man, the senior citizen, says to Chani, Alma becharuva ashkachte. You know something? This man found a world containing fully grown carob trees. Yeah? Ki heichi deshastali. Just as those who before me planted it for me, ahavasi shasliname, just as those who before me planted those trees for me, so too I plant for the next generation. That's what he said. Okay, so obviously relevant to Tu B'Shvat, this discussion, that was yesterday. But I think it's the discussion for us as well. My friends, this is a question only you can answer yourself. And this is the question we have to ask. Am I planting something in my life for my children, for my grandchildren? I know we're not there yet. I'm still a little kid. But we have future generations. Is there something we're doing that the next generation can look at and say, thank you, Grandma, Baba, Zayda. Thank you. That's why the Torah compares us to the tree of the field. We each have an opportunity. And this is another comparison that Rav Huna was making in the Gemara based on the words of King David and Tehillim and King Solomon and Kohelet. That every human being, we each leave an impact. We're all here for no matter how many years it might be. Life is a play, as we said. And each of us contributes our verse, our musical note to the ballad. Each of us casts our own inimitable shadow on the world. That's the message. And the question is, how real, how profound will our impact be? Will our shadow be that of the bird, fleeting? Will we be like the wall sometimes? Or will we be like the tree, consistent? There are people who we know never begin to live There are people who are waiting until they can begin to live. Maybe it's time to wake up and smell the coffee. And then there are people who never stop living. When the Talmud says Yaakov Avinu lo met, Jacob, our patriarch, never died. What does the Talmud mean? After all, the Torah describes his funeral, his embalmment. We even know where he's buried. I hope not. But the idea, yes, of course, that the Torah itself explicitly says he passed away. So I wonder if I have to pause this to tell a terrible joke that a Hasidic Jew, non-Chabad, once said to me. Should I pause it or we'll delete it after from the video? This guy says to me one day, I used to go, when I lived in Brooklyn, I'd sometimes go to Williamsburg. There's nicer pizza. It was a little different. I like to sit in the shop and have a sprach, a shmooze in Yiddish. Also, I grew up with Russisch Yiddish, Russian Yiddish. And there was a Polish Yiddish. I had a chance to hear something a little different. In fact, I was on YouTube the other day watching a video of somebody, a German, trying to decipher Yiddish. It was very funny to watch. And in fact, they had a German rabbi. Some of you came to hear him speak when he was here a couple of weeks back, Rabbi Wagner. Rabbi Wagner is the rabbi. I already forgot what his city is. Anyways, he wants to go on to Ronnie Kaplan's radio show on Thursdays. Maybe we'll get him on soon to do some Yiddish compared to German and Afrikaans. We did that at our Malava Malka with him. It was very funny because some of the people at our shul speak Afrikaans. I speak Yiddish. My wife speaks Yiddish and he speaks German. So we were able to, it was funny to hear the different words and the comparisons. Anyways, I was there and the Satmar Chussid, and you got to know Satmar had a little bit of a rough patch in the relationship with Lubavitch in certain years because there was a time in the 1980s where there was maybe a leadership gap or people were uninspired there. And a whole bunch of Satmar Hasidim became Lubavitcher Hasidim. They weren't happy about it and they were very vigilante. But thank God today everything is brought back together. Anyways, when I'm sitting in the pizza shop, the Satmar Chussid looks at me and says, Zug me, bist a Lubavitcher Chussid? Tell me, you're a Lubavitcher, right? I say, yeah. He says, Wus is the Unterscheid zwischen the Lubavitcher Rebbe and Moshe Rabbeinu? You understood that? What's the difference between the Lubavitcher Rebbe and Moses? So I start thinking, is he asking me this as a philosophical question? In Hasidic parlance, we say this, in fact, the Zohar says, every generation has ispashtusa de Moshe, a spark of Moses in it. And no doubt, the Rebbe is the Moshe of our time. So I start thinking he's going that direction. Is the Rebbe the Moshe? And I said, of course, the Rebbe is our Moshe, our leader. In fact, last week we celebrated 76 years of the Rebbe's leadership. He says, 999, don't get so complicated. He says, this is how it goes. Moshe Rabbeinu, we know he passed away, it says in the Torah, but we don't know where he's buried, right? The Lubavitcher Rebbe, he never passed away, but we know where he's buried. Everybody goes to his resting place. Fine, Zol Zayin. That's what I said, that's the part I got to delete afterwards. But either way, it's the point is, the Talmud tells us that even after one is passed on, they could continue to live. Mazara b'chaim, afu b'chaim. Once children continue in their ways, then they too are alive. In fact, we know it's one of the greatest blessings. The Talmud tells a story about a man who was traveling and he was getting weary and tired and exhausted, thirsty from his travels. And finally, he sees an oasis appear in the desert. So he looks, and unbelievable. There's a beautiful tree in which he could rest, and there's fruit that he could eat and nourish himself and regenerate. And there's a stream of water underneath it. He could refresh himself and bathe and drink. Unbelievable, geschmack. And so he does. He rests under the tree. He rests up. He eats. He drinks. He bathes. And now he's ready to continue on his way. The Talmud says before he goes, he sings a little song to the tree. This is the tune I know. Feel free to sing along. Ilan, Ilan. Anyone want to translate? Tree, oh tree. Edna, your son-in-law is Ilan. Your brother-in-law, right? Ilan. The tree. How should I bless you, tree? How do I thank you for your kind hospitality, your generosity to me? Sheyehi perotecha metukin, harei perotecha metukin, sheyehi tzilcha naeh, Harei tzilcha. Should I bless you to have splendid fruit? Your fruit, I tasted it. It's already delicious. Should I bless you to have fine shade? I already experienced that shade. It is so rejuvenating and restful. Respitable, is there such a word? Should I bless you to have refreshing waters? I tasted it. Geschmack it is. Instead, you know what my blessing to you is? May it be the will of the Holy One, blessed be He. Shekol netiyot, that all seedlings, shenotim imcha yiyu kemocha, they should all your seedlings should be like you. Rabbi Goldman likes to say every rabbi has one sermon. I feel every day I have nothing new to say. Come here, I'm like, ay vey, you heard everything I have to say already. I told you every story I know, every joke. I have nothing new left in my repertoire. Unless God gives me a new fresh story to share with you today. Who knows? I think I gave you some fresh ones recently. You don't remember? Okay, I'll tell you that. I can repeat today's share again tomorrow. Especially those who watch it on YouTube are probably seeing this. Oh, he said the same thing yesterday. No? Either way, what's my message? Rabbi Goldman says we all have one sermon. And that sermon is not that we repeat ourselves per se, but it's the way we live. How do we live? How do we conduct our lives? We're role models. People look up to us, every one of us. Let's live up. Let's live up to that, pardon? To that dash. Ooh, very good vert. The dash. You know, unfortunately, I'm at West Park too often. We look at the graves. And some graves have long Megillas. Okay, they want to give you everything they know about the person. In fact, I saw a lady there when she found out that her husband was unfaithful to her. I saw her asking the stonemason at the bottom where it said, rest in peace. She said to him, I want you to add a few words till we meet again. And the stonemason said to me, that's not the worst. He said one time he was making a matzeva stone, and I couldn't believe at the unveiling. It said there, here lies Harry, a great man. His Lexus is for sale. Okay, jokes aside, my friends, I want to look here, an interesting story that I would like to share. On the first day, where is it? No. Okay, here's a little Maisala. Okay, where did it go? A scientist at GE, you hear this? A scientist at GE once complained to a rabbi that because he isn't provided with a secretary, he doesn't have a PA, he ends up wasting a vast amount of time on secretarial work instead of researching and inventing. He says, they pay me so much to do so little. Sometimes I think about myself that way, except they don't pay me so much and I don't do so little. But the rabbi responded, that's funny. I get paid so little to do so much. Okay, so here is the Maisala. On the first day, God created a dog and said, sit all day by the door of your house and bark at anyone who comes in or walks past, okay? For this, I will give you a lifespan of 20 years. The dog said, that's a long time to be barking. How about only 10 years, and I'll give you back the other 10. So God agreed. On the second day, God created the monkey and said, entertain people, do tricks, make them laugh. For this, I'll give you a 20-year lifespan. Monkey said, monkey tricks for 20 years? That's a pretty long time to perform. How about I give you back 10 like the dog did? Okay, God agreed. On the third day, God created the cow and said, you must go into the field with the farmer all day long and suffer under the sun. Have calves and give milk to support the farmer's family. For this, I'll give you a lifespan of 60 years. Shoo. Cow said, that's kind of tough life. You want me to live for 60 years? How about 20, and I'll give you back the other 40. God agreed. On the fourth day, God created man and said, eat, sleep, play, marry, and enjoy your life. For this, I'll give you 20 years. The man said, only 20 years? Could you possibly give me my 20 years? The 40 years that the cow gave back, the 10 years the monkey gave back, and the 10 years that the dog gave back? That makes 80 years, okay? Okay, God said, you asked for it. So that's why our first 10 years, what happened first 20 years? We eat, sleep, play, and enjoy ourselves. Then for the next 40 years, we slave in the sun to support our families. And for the next 10 years, we do monkey tricks to entertain the grandchildren. And for the last 10 years, this was for you, my dear seniors, we sit on the front porch and bark at everyone. Okay, joke, sorry. On a more serious note, my friends, the message of today's discussion was that we have to commit ourselves to making the most of our lives. That's the message. How do we make the most of every single day? Because an unproductive human is the greatest oxymoron that can possibly ever be. Right? Let's learn from the tree. Let's devote our lives to give, to grow, to accomplish, to actually make a difference in this world, which I know I'm talking to people who do. As the Zohar says, every single day has work that has to get done. That's what the Zohar says. In other words, each day is an opportunity for us to work in order to fulfill our mission that God gave us to illuminate our portion of the world. Where we are, we're here for a purpose. And if we're in Joburg, that means this is our part of the world where we can make a difference for ourselves, for our family, for our surrounding. This is what we're here for. And that's why we're here. So let's seize every moment, every opportunity we have to make the most, to make a difference here, because we all can make a difference and we all should and will make that difference. Thoughts, questions, comments? Oh, very good. Certainly, we should be growing and learning in our Judaism from the Torah. The Torah is every day, every time we learn Torah, we have to see the new messages and lessons that the Torah has in store for us. And there are so many, right? It's not that we're just living our life and saying, you study the Torah and it's the same old thing. Every time you study Torah, this should be fresh. Every day should be kechadashim. Should be something new that we derive and learn from it, right? Shivim panim Torah. There's 70 facets to the Torah. Absolutely, 100%, 100%. We should always be learning from it. Every day should be a learning experience that we should grow and learn from the Torah. 100%. Yes. Questions?
No.
Okay, let's hear. Yeah. Sorry, one at a time. Okay, go ahead.
About being essence of rooted in the Torah.
Yeah.
The Torah is the stem or support of all we learn and all we do. The leaves of the Torah.
Yeah.
Nourishment that we get from the new.
Absolutely. 100%.
Of mitzvah and teaching.
100%. Absolutely. That's what we've been discussing. Absolutely. Yeah, David. See, we gave it a nice new spin. That generally shadows have a more negative connotation. And here we talked about the shadows more in a sense of a positive one. Yeah, the shadow of Hashem, 100%. And we have to know we're constantly in the shadow of Hashem. Pardon? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so now to continue that discussion, we were talking in more detail last week, if you recall, about looking at the world as God's garden, right? And seeing how sometimes the world does look more like a jungle of, sorry, I'm going to just put that PowerPoint on for those who asked for it. For those, oftentimes the world looks more like a jungle than a garden, right? So how can we make the world more garden-like and less jungly? And that sometimes seems to be a challenge, because after all, when we see Hamas, and we see Hezbollah, and we see all those problems that exist out there, and perhaps even in our own condition. And we have to remind ourselves that catastrophes and human suffering and all those problems that we see, while they do exist, we're not burying our heads in the sand and saying there's no problems in the world. But nevertheless, they're far and few between. Robberies happen, but they're not happening to everyone every day. And all the problems that exist, they all happen. They happen all the time. There are tornadoes and there are hurricanes and there are floods in Limpopo right now. I'm not saying it's pleasant or easy for the people there. They're having a hard time, right? But let's remember that they also have plenty of time in the year then it doesn't happen. Not that it's good when it does happen. There are weeds in the garden. The garden has problems, and we have to clean the garden. That's our task here, okay? But the point that Rambam Maimonides says is that people oftentimes think of disasters and problems, and you read the news, and the world is always in trouble, and there's always problems here. So Rambam makes the case that if you do the arithmetic, you will realize that the world is not such a bad place. That in fact, if you look at the structure and the fabric of our world, we will see that goodness is actually the very fabric of the world. Most of the time, there's lots of good things happen. If you even look back at your day, I'm sure there was one person who said something not nice to you today. It's happened. It happens in life. Or somebody looked at you the wrong way. But how many people were nice? And how many people complimented? Think about all the things you did. Do we sometimes snap at people and do something that we feel disastrous about and feel like, oh, how did I behave that way? And it's true. We're human beings. Human beings ain't tzaddik hashiyasa tavalech. There's no such thing as a righteous person who does only good and never sins. It's part of the human conditions that we make mistakes, that we mess up, right? I squandered time. I was on whatever TikTok, social media, doing things that were not exactly productive, right? But can I make the rest of the time up better? Don't feel that I'm a failure just because I failed. In fact, fail stands for first attempt in learning. That's what it stands for, at least in today's acronym. And so we have to try to at least change that paradigm, that perspective that things are bad. There are problems in the world, no doubt. I don't remember if I showed you that video last week, but there was a beautiful video. I definitely played her once before, where the Rebbe was visited by soldiers from Tzahal, from the IDF. Okay, these were a specific group. They were called Nachei Tzahal, the soldiers of the IDF who were injured. They were, what is Nachei? I don't speak Hebrew, so or what's Nachei Tzahal? The injured, the handicapped soldiers. Yeah. So these people, you know, they made the ultimate or almost ultimate sacrifice. They did things to protect whatever they put themselves in a position to protect Israel. And now they were missing limbs. And this was back in the 60s and 70s when they didn't have the same technology. Today, there's, you know, it's not perfect, but there's at least, what do you call those? Prosthetics, right? So at least they have a way to walk and to hold. I mean, I've seen soldiers post October 7th who lost hands and feet, and you see that they have prosthetics for both. It's unbelievable, the recovery. In those days, they didn't have the prosthetics. They couldn't help them. And the Rebbe meets with them and he hears their worries and speaks to them and smiles. And he imbues them with optimism and with positivity, right? And he tells them how they have special abilities and energies that allow them to overcome their deficiencies. And he uplifts them. And he says, don't focus on the negative. He says, instead of being called the injured or the disabled soldiers, he says, focus on the positive. In fact, he says they should be called, he gave them a name. I'm forgetting what the name was. How did it just skip me? Mitsuyanei Tzahal, the excellent, the best of the, you know, there was a movie, Best of Men. Any of you ever watched it? There was a time we used to do movies here. Maybe we should go back to that. I don't have time to watch them with you, but I could set them up. If you guys want that, we could think of activities to do. Once a week, a movie hour. And one of those movies that we showed here or then, back in the day, was Best of Men. Has anyone here watched that movie, Best of Men? Let me tell you in a nutshell what it was. In the 1940s, there was a German doctor who was expelled or left. I don't remember. I watched that movie in 2013. So it's a long time ago, or maybe it was 2015, but it was a long time back, over 10 years ago. So I don't remember the details. But the point was, it was a Jewish doctor in Germany, or a German occupied country, who could no longer perform his duties, and he wound up going to England. And he got a position, not in the field of his expertise per se, but he got a position to practice as a doctor at a hospital for people with cerebral palsy and other, what do you call these? My head today, the words are not coming to my mind. Basically, people who couldn't conduct themselves well. But what would you put that category into? People with CP and challenges. I don't know if they were autistic per se, but there were people who couldn't physically, they couldn't participate in athletic activities and in Olympics and things like that. They were handicapped people, but they were the word I'm looking for. Anyways, this doctor, what did he do? He started, and the doctors in that hospital in Manchester gave up on them. They basically just tended to these patients, gave them their needs, but they would lie in bed all day in a ward. Think of a room this size or bigger. They would all lie in a bed, and basically the whole day was squandered away. This doctor came there and said, no. No productive human being should ever be lying in a bed all day. That's counterintuitive. That's counterproductive. It won't work. And he started giving these people who had injuries or were born, nobody's born perfect, but you know what I mean? They weren't born capable. And he started pushing them to do certain activities and created mini Olympics for them. Anyways, the reason the movie is called Best of Men is because when the hospital looked at them as invalids, he said, you're not handicapped, you're not invalid, you're the best of men. Hence the name of the movie, in a very powerful pep speech that he gives them. And thanks to him, I think he was the one who started what we all know today as the Paralympics. Now, who could check his name so we could give him the credit? Who started Gottlieb? No, not Gottlieb. Check it up. Yeah. Who was the man who the movie Best of Men is based on? Who was a doctor? Yeah, you'll get it to us. Anyways, the Rebbe's message that he said to the soldiers there, that they are mitzuyanei tzahal, that they are the best of the soldiers, okay? The Rebbe used the same term as the doctor, okay? It's a positive thinking. In fact, he refused to call hospitals Beit Cholim, house of the sick. He preferred to call it a Beit Refuah or Merkaz Refuah, which I think many hospitals in Israel adopted. Maybe he's the guy who started the Paralympics. Maybe Google that. Either way, there's so much that we could think of. Instead of looking at deadlines, why don't we say we have due dates? Yeah? A deadline has a negative connotation. Let's be positive in our terminology. Yeah, who is the best of them based on? It's coming back to you. Even today, the term used for challenged children is they're no longer called handicapped and things like that. There we go. We were close. Ludwig Gutmann. And there we are. Ludwig Gutmann. Fled Nazi Germany, wound up in England, I think in Manchester. So we're not using this terminology to call them the best of men to deny their challenges. In fact, people don't like when you deny it's patronizing. You don't have to deny a person's, we should cater to their needs. In my shul, I insist, my new shul, and here too, it took us time, but we got here. Now we have a proper wheelchair access. It took us a long time to get it done, but we did it, right? At the shul, the same thing. It's not about denying. On the contrary, we have to cater and accommodate to people's special needs, but we shouldn't be also making as if they're invalids and they can't get anything done. I'm sure you see people who are older, and some people say, "Nebach, poor me. I'm past my due date. I'm waiting to die." No such thing. utilize every single moment. And if children have special needs, well, they also have special abilities to compensate for the disadvantage, so to say. And all these types of things, why did the Rebbe assert that the injured soldiers and the special children have special abilities? Alongside, not denying the deficiencies. Because if God is in everything, then there must be positive in everything. Even with the suffering, even with the unexplainable physical deficiencies, we're not denying they exist. But what we're saying is, if they do exist, then at least we should be aware of them and also to see the benefit, the good, the positive in everything as well. So again, it's not trying to be polite and sugarcoating and whatever other terminology they use for that to make people feel good. I think it's a paradigm, a perspective of life to see things in the right way. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. Mm. See, what concerns him is, how does he do Netilat Yadayim with this one? I guess he's on, I don't know. What did the rabbi say? I'm sure there must be a halachic way to go about it. But you look at what concerns this person was what do I do about that? The halachic ramification. It's unbelievable. I want to end with two stories that come to my mind. There was a woman who was about to celebrate her wedding, not her wedding, her daughter's wedding, okay? And it was the week when her own mother passed away, which I saw this week happen in another community that I'm familiar with. Not exactly the same, but the aunt of there's a wedding happening, and on the day of the wedding, the chassan's aunt passed away. So now, this wasn't at the wedding, but I'm sure these things have happened. Recently? Oh, no, actually, I remember a friend of mine's wedding, or was it his kid's wedding? His father passed away during the wedding, and they had to avoid telling the family. Yeah, look, things happen. The point I want to say is, I'm going to give you a real story that happened. The grandmother of the Kala passed away, okay? So the mother was a little bit distraught how she should celebrate her daughter's wedding, and she's burying her mother. I don't know exactly the timeline. And the Rebbe wrote that she should be told the medrash that immediately after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, when the temple was destroyed, Mashiach, the Redeemer of Israel, was born. Right? Now, we obviously haven't had Mashiach yet. So the Gemara explains that if that generation would have merited, then Mashiach would have come. So I don't know if it's the potential of Mashiach or a potential Mashiach, whatever way you want to understand it. We don't have to go into the detail of it. But the Rebbe was saying basically, this wasn't a random coincidence. It was reflective of God's process, that even when inexplicable suffering happens, okay, God provides a counterbalance, a path for consolation. I remember my wife and I both lost a parent in the year of our wedding. And it was difficult. 2 months before you got married. Okay, my mother passed away 9 months before I got married, and Batya lost her dad about 6 months before in just a few months after my mother passed away. And the truth is, I found that the wedding brought a lot of consolation and joy to the family during a difficult time. And that's exactly what the Rebbe is writing in this letter. When the Jewish people learned that Mashiach was born then in the time of the temple, even though Mashiach hadn't ultimately come because they weren't deserving it, but it gave them strength that they were able to surmount the blow of the destruction, that despite the challenges and obstacles and difficulties and everything they went through. So the point is that even in terrible suffering, there's always roses still in the garden. There's still goodness in the world. This world is still God's garden. Everyone has their personal Mashiach that you have to look for your own consolation in your own churban, in your own calamity, in your own suffering. And every person has their own difficulties and challenges. And it's natural to think that the wedding is ruined because of the loss, because the grandmother passed away. Now they can't celebrate, and they really, Papa won't be at the wedding. And certainly that's difficult. And the Rebbe was not denying their mourning. He didn't do that. But at the same time, I think delicately, he was saying to them that death is tragic, right? But we need to boost, we need a dosage, a boost to overcome the loss. And God orchestrated the wedding to be in proximity to this woman's passing away. That hopefully makes it easier for the family to cope with the loss. Not to see, there's two ways of seeing it. You could see it as, it depends. What was the one the other day? I told you the one about the glasses, but someone else put it the other way, the window. This lady was always looking out the window and everything looked terrible. And one day she says, oh, it looks good. What did you do? And the husband says, I cleaned the window. So it's not so overcast today. And I think it's about a paradigm, the way we see things. And we could see things, one could see that it's a terrible tragedy, or one could see it that God orchestrated in this way that they could cope with their loss better. And seeing the growth of their family and the perpetuation of the mother's legacy happening that very day. Of course, one has to know how to say it and say it in the right way. Another story that comes to mind, the previous Rebbe once met, two people came into him. They were coming from Odessa, and they each had a story to tell, their own stories. One person, he came in, the Rebbe asks him, Was tut sich, how's life in Odessa? He says, it's wonderful, the people are happy, they're learning, they're this, wonderful. And the Rebbe gives him a nice, 10 rubles or whatever it was, a nice contribution towards his causes. The next rabbi came in. What's happening in Odessa? He says, Rebbe, I heard what the other guy told you. Not true. We have machlokes and faribbles and people are fighting and the community is a disaster. Everything is doom and gloom. It's doomsday. And the Rebbe gives him a little contribution, 1 ruble, whatever it was, for his kehillah. He says, Rebbe, I don't understand. The other guy lies to you. He tells you everything's rosy, it's beautiful, it's magnificent. It's not true. I told you the truth. The Rebbe looks at him and says, I know what's going on in Odessa. I didn't need him or you to tell me either. I get my reports. But I'm looking at who has the right perspective. He at least sees how we're going to turn it around. And that, my friends, is the message to us for today. Let's have the right approach. Let's not see ourselves as the fleeting bird. Let's see ourselves as we're going to make a lasting impression. And what kind of impression? A positive and optimistic one. Let's tell our children, let's tell our family, let's be the ones who can bring positivity to those around us and will make the right difference that the world needs, especially today. Shkoyach, everyone. Enjoy lunch, enjoy beating, and see